Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 223. I nearly messed that up then. I'm delighted to welcome onto the podcast today physical performance coach Hailu Theodros. Hailu, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm very good, very good. Getting used to the new year and getting into the flow of things. But good, very good.
That's good to hear. And thank you very much for coming on. I've been peppering you with messages to try and tie down a date and get you on. So I really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Perfect, mate. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are aware what you're doing currently. And if there isn't, they're going to find out very soon. But can you take us back and just give them a little idea about the career so far that you've had?
Yeah, so things kind of started. I started actually in more of a in the medical field. I started doing sports rehabilitation undergraduate degree at St Mary's. That's kind of where I definitely wanted to go. Originally wanted to go down the physiotherapy route, rehabilitation route, and kind of halfway through that course, it was a great course, was a big foundation for some of my knowledge and understanding around things. But halfway through, I was given the opportunity to kind of to work part-time at Chelsea, which prior to the recent change, I was there for 9 years. But started that role as part-time, working with the under nines, kind of coming in Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays. And that was more of a performance-based role, so more on the sports science, strength and conditioning side of things. And it was a quite nice dynamic, kind of really being really heavy on the injury side, and then coming into that performance environment helped me to kind of understand a bit more late stage rehab at the time. But I kind of really enjoyed the performance space and the problem solving around it, and actually transitioned my career towards that. I was fortunate enough to kind of as I came towards the end of my undergraduate degree to get a full-time role there. That was kind of mainly working with the 9s to 14s across those groups, kind of with the evening program, the day release program. And yeah, just kind of ran with it there. And I think the rehab, there was still a lot of holes to plug in my knowledge going into the performance space, but the performance field. But the rehabilitation environment was a great platform for me to just understand anatomy, understand anatomy, how the body moves from a kinematic standpoint. That was very heavy on the course, and probably needed to just plug a few holes within my training knowledge. And that's where actually I picked up my MSc at MSc and S&C at St Mary's as well, kind of alongside my role at Chelsea, my full-time role, and that was great. It was a distance learning course. It was great to kind of learn something on the Monday in my own time and then apply it straight away, and really had loads of questions. It was kind of this new role that I was going into, so working with the 9s and working with the 14s and doing some bits with the older groups. There was a real wide range of experiences and coaching experiences that I had, and was able to support that with real scientific education that I was doing at some S&C at the S&C Masters. So yeah, that's kind of blinked, and then it was 9 years. But my role was primarily my role for a big part of my 9 years at Chelsea. And kind of, yeah, so mainly working 9s 14s, then went on to overseeing the physical program for 6 years, 9s to 15s, and kind of evolving that physical program, adapting it, building on it, and still very much involved in the delivery side of things, but had a bigger involvement on the strategic side. Then and then also did over that period did a lot of work individually with the 18s and 23s in a movement coach role, which sounds very broad and strange, but that was essentially really trying to bridge the gap between gym and field. This kind of real transferable skills or transition movements that we'll come on to later. That was a role that was kind of like a referral based system that coaches would kind of highlight players that needed to improve on their movement. But a lot of these situations didn't either fit in the gym, but didn't really fit on the technical side. So my role was to kind of bridge the gap between that and really work on these key performance situations that were highlighted by the coach, and use that scientific knowledge or or that physical testing that we had to really bridge the gap and understand how we can help players improve their movement, specific to these situations that coaches would highlight. And that for me, I think those 9 years of working from 9s through to 23s at different points was really fundamental to my journey. And definitely starting at the younger groups was quite fundamental. It really challenged a lot of my thoughts around skills versus capacities. And actually, I think we have a very heavy emphasis on capacities. Or can be, maybe not so much of recent, but definitely back then it was about what you're doing in the gym and being strong, etc. And actually seeing individuals at a young age be very competent, but not very competent in the gym, but being very competent on the field, fast, strong, agile, etc. Really allowed me to challenge my thoughts around what we traditionally believe. So that was fundamental, and also seeing how does that transition? How does a 9 go through to the ages of 23? Just before I left, I was fortunate enough that the first group I started with under 9s ended up being the last group. So I almost managed to see a full cycle when they got to 18s, and that was a big eye opener about like the developmental process and what needs to occur at different ages and what becomes important. And also, how to develop a program as well. Sorry, I've kind of waffled on a bit there, but
No, not at all. It's always that scary moment, isn't it, when you can watch players go through those cycles of 9 years. You suddenly reflect on, oh wow, they were under 9 not that long ago.
yeah,
Just on
100%.
that point though, working how your role transitioned throughout that time, was
Yes.
there, you sort of mentioned it with the younger ages that challenged you in probably a slightly different way as a coach.
Yeah.
But was there a point in time where you feel you made the most progression as a coach, whether that was working with a certain age or whether that was
Um,
just a certain time in your career?
um, that's a really good question. I think when I took over the program, and I was probably accelerated my career quite a lot because I had to upskill myself a lot more in terms of both like anecdotally in terms of my experience and where the groups I was working with, but also just my knowledge of the whole program, because I think at times I felt like I was probably stuck in my age group at times,
Yeah.
and zooming out a little bit allowed me to have appreciation for where we're trying to get people to, and how does that look day to day, which, if I'm honest, was really challenging. Was really challenging when I started. It was, how do we go from here to here and really work out the details of from a yearly cycle to a sessional cycle, or sessional progression. So I think my career definitely had an acceleration in terms of learning around that period. There was a lot of things I didn't get right. And I happily say that. I think back to some of the things that I was doing, and was probably, wasn't great. But that was important as well. That was important. That was kind of all part of the process of kind of experimenting, trying different things, actually seeing what players had success with. What did the program have success with? How do we manage the overall objectives of the club, as well as the physical development objectives? How do we marry those up at different groups? What becomes how to navigate certain conversations? How to understand where the coach is coming from and take that and apply that to a physical setting. And a lot of those different areas was definitely something I was just exposed to by the role I was in.
It's something we're going to touch on in a minute, but the sort of transitional movements and transitional movement patterns and that link, like you mentioned, between gym and pitch,
Yeah.
was that a bit of a natural progression of in terms of you of a practitioner in an area of interest, or was that because
So
you
that was kind of,
now?
so that was kind of going on before I was kind of, that role and responsibility was kind of passed on to me when my line manager moved on. But it's great to see, because I think it's becoming a lot more of a well understood now. But back then I found it very challenging taking that on. If I'm honest, it was, how do we, first of all, how do we understand what the coaches are saying? Coaches would describe things, okay, he doesn't move very well, or he can't adjust his feet. And really taking these really broad subjective comments, which are very valid for sure, especially from the experienced coaches that they're coming from. But how do we take these concepts and dissect them and understand where they need to spend their time, because I think one thing that I found really challenging is that there would be 5 players that would all fit into the same. So one common theme was defenders. Defenders would typically be the ones that get referred. It doesn't move his feet very well, isn't very balanced, and these broad comments. But there were 5 players that all had the similar issue, but what was driving those issues were very, very vastly different across all of them.
Yeah.
So that was really challenging for me to understand, okay, where does strength fit in this? Where does speed fit in this? Where does change direction ability fit in this? Where does braking fit in this? Is his limitation in 1v1 situations because he can't brake well, or actually is it his perceptual abilities? Is it his tactical understanding? And I think that gave me a real appreciation for, as much as I speak about this a fair bit with Jonas, but I think sometimes the angle that we come from at times in S&C and sports science can be testing upwards. We test across multiple different physical qualities, and then we work up to performance, as opposed to understanding where the coaches come from, which is performance down, and understanding where testing fits in as part of the puzzle, as opposed to our starting point. And that was a big learning curve for me, and that's definitely how I view things now. I think testing tells us a bit more as part of our decision tree in terms of where we need to spend our time, but definitely this reductionist approach of starting at physical qualities only can mask a lot of things that actually the coaches are talking about, and actually how do we marry up these two? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think we oversimplified things. You mentioned it before. We kind of oversimplified things a little bit ago, and we're getting more context behind it now, didn't we? That you just got to get a player stronger.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
well, where does that go, and what does that mean, and
Yeah,
like how does that impact them? So
how does he express it? How does he express that for us? What are the strategies? And a lot of the work that Jonas has done even prior to me joining Speedworks has definitely helped me to understand that even more, as I've kind of got. But those are definitely the questions I was having at the club. Like, okay, they all need to improve their deceleration, but actually he's maybe more force dominant. He's maybe a bit more of an elastic athlete. How does that influence his strategies? How does what we see in testing, how does the way he jump influence or tell us something about how he chooses to move? And then where do we need to spend our time? Is it in the gym potentially? But actually, is it at his physical skills? How do we balance those two? And prioritize to kind of get a performance change, not just a gym change or a testing change.
Yeah, because we probably all have players where you've got real success on a gym program, haven't you? And actually measuring that to pitch performance can be probably quite different.
Yeah, 100%. And for me, again, that was kind of this starting from rehab. I kind of wasn't. I think I thought about things slightly differently a little bit, just because of the educational background that was. And do you know, I'll be honest, I also did part of the masters to kind of challenge my own thoughts, to come out. Am I still going to come out of this masters with the same opinions that I had in terms of skills are important as capacities? Or am I going to come out the other end and realize that, capacity is the only thing? And I'm quite happy that I managed to come out the end and gain a greater insight as to why capacities are important and physical qualities are important, but actually, no, skills are still very important.
Yeah.
And skills, actually how we transfer those capacities into performance. So it was quite a pivotal part of my journey, I'd say.
And you just sort of referenced it before, but if anyone doesn't know, we just give a bit of background around your current role now as well.
Okay, yeah. So I've been working with Speedworks now for the last close to a year. Kind of doing that whilst I was still at Chelsea a little bit, in a part-time capacity, and then more recently full-time with Speedworks for the last 2 months. And that's been great, kind of coming on board, working a lot more in that private sector, working a bit more individually with athletes. And it's been interesting being on both sides of the fence, being at a club environment for so long. And then it's been a challenging transition, but a good one as well. And there's pros and cons for both. But one thing I think I came to realize towards the end of my time at Chelsea is that I really enjoyed working individually with athletes, and I also wanted to push my development. And I think sometimes the hecticness or the lack of time at times within a club environment, I felt at times kind of hindered my development, how much time I had to reflect, how much time I had to really dive deeper, and being working with more bigger groups and doing more which is a skill in itself, definitely, but it's a skill in itself to be able to group people and understand how to work within those numbers. But I think one thing I highlighted was I wanted to push my knowledge and my development a bit more by diving in a bit deeper, being able to work closely with one individual and actually really understand the data a bit more. How do we link the data to sessions? How do we build that across a year? And coming on board as Speedworks has facilitated that, still working with footballers. But it's been great to kind of have that time and that dedicated one-to-one contact time that is really focused and specific around not only the training side, but also the teaching side, the coaching side of things, which I'm really enjoying. And I think I also realized that I also really enjoyed the coach athlete relationship, and you get that a lot more with a one-to-one or smaller groups. So yeah, it's a contrast to the things I've done, a lot of similarities as well, but a contrast, but really enjoying it. I think it was the right thing I needed at the time to push my development, and yeah, the next thing for me as a practitioner.
No, it's really interesting you saying about that, because obviously you said before about like having groups of 5 players with all from the outside looking very similar performance like issues or things to work on, and it
Yeah,
poses that question, doesn't it? But when you start diving into it, you've
yeah,
essentially got 5 individuals there, 5 individual
yeah,
circumstances, 5 individual amounts of time that you have to invest in that player.
yeah,
So it becomes quite hard, and that's just 5 players out of the squad of however many as well, isn't it? So
yeah, yeah.
it's a really interesting one.
That's what I've enjoyed, like being able to be a lot closer with less players has allowed me to appreciate the differences between individuals, and that's
Yeah,
my development a bit more, because I need to understand that actually this person needs this, and it might only be slight different coaching variations, or it might be a whole complete different program.
yeah,
But when working in those groups, I think it can be challenging to really identify those differences between people, or those limitations to then dictate where the program needs to go, um, uh, just because of the time available. But
yeah.
like I said, those things are skills in itself. I think working in that team environment and individualizing within the team is, as tough as it is a skill in itself. And then almost being able to bucket players into groups, and those are skills itself. But I exercised that for 9 years and actually wanted to try dive a bit deeper.
Yeah, brilliant. Talking of diving a bit deeper, let's do it now, because I know we've got some cool topics to cover. We've referenced it a little bit around optimizing speed through these transitional movements. And I know it's
Yeah.
something you've spoke about before. Can you give a little bit more information around what you mean behind that?
So around transitional movements.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So this again, this is kind of a lot of the work comes from the work that I've done with Jonas sort of more recently, and we're building on that a lot more, and to really try and share some of that information and understand it a bit more. But a lot of it also comes from the work I did at Chelsea, and um, transitional movements for me is that grey area that we spoke about. That grey area where actually, because of the nature of team sports, is very multi-directional. But again, I think we want to test and we want to bucket things into these things so we can understand them. So transitional movements are, for me, what connects linear speed with deceleration, change direction with deceleration, and it's almost the connectors that facilitate people being as expressive in those bigger, broader qualities, which is acceleration or speed. And I think the nature of team sports, those transition moves actually, in my experience as well, are very pivotal to how much in performance situations they're quite pivotal. And what I mean by that is the coaches would continuously talk about, he doesn't move very well, and he doesn't adjust his feet, he doesn't backpedal very well, he loses his balance. And taking all of these comments, it was very difficult, again, without reiterating it, because we did a change direction, a 505 test or a 10-meter test. It was really hard to understand what these coaches were talking about, because all we would default to would be this test, this test, this test. And actually, a lot of the times, players will be really good in those tests, those isolated tests. But then, yeah, when you're watching the game, you do see that actually that is the biggest thing that is affecting his performance. A key defenders, again, using them as an example, they're a key success criteria for them is being able to be competent in 1v1 defending. But there was the individuals I used to deal with that, again, were quick, can change direction well, but actually when asked to rotate and turn or backpedal all at the same time, would really struggle to reorientate, control their center of mass, or redirect their speed. So for me, transitional movements is a mixture of, for me, there's four core areas. I would say there's four core skills, and I would group them, and it's not something brand new. Everyone knows about a back pedal, a lateral shuffle, a rotational shuffle, or a drop step, so to speak, and a crossover step. Those are definitely the four that we tend to see. But those areas, in my beliefs, are not almost tools that people pick up, and so you just use the back pedal when you have that situation, or use a side shuffle when you use that situation, or a crossover step. A lot of these are a mixture of all of them put together, and a lot of it, when you see it from a game speed perspective, are blended together. Yeah. But they are skills that are, from my experience, are not really worked upon because we don't test them, or we don't objectify them. But so the work that I did at Chelsea has been, so I'm rambling on a little bit here, but the work I did at Chelsea was really focusing on actually how do we help these individuals improve at their transitional movements in order for them to be able to access their speed quicker that they do have in a 10-meter sprint, or be able to connect acceleration to deceleration, the transitions that happen in between. Sorry, I kind of rambled on there, gone on a bit of a tangent. Makes sense? Is that clear?
Yeah, it does. It does 100%. And with that in mind, obviously, these four key areas,
yeah,
especially with the work at Chelsea, when you're working with those age groups, are they things that you put into the program and they stay in the program throughout that whole time?
Yeah. So those skills, those skills were part of the program in a general sense at their young groups with no real specificity. Actually, can you just be good at those skills in a non-specific sense? But then at the older groups, it would be a lot more targeted. Okay, actually, what are the situations that you need to work on as an individual? Is it actually your ability to backpedal specifically because this situation is where you struggle? Okay, then actually targeting that and actually really having a particular emphasis on that. Or actually, is it a crossover step, actually 1v1, your ability to turn and stay tight to players and your ability to twist your hips, etc., is where you struggle. So we're going to focus a bit more on that. So yeah, those transitional movements is something that I've kind of been working a lot on to really try and understand, and also share and share to people, so that to highlight the importance of it, even though we can't attest it. So it definitely sits on the game speed end. But with the work we've been doing in Speedo, it's probably something good to dive into now. Actually, a lot of the projects that I've been doing with Speedo, as well as coaching and consulting, has been really trying to understand breaking a bit more. And actually breaking comes into those transitional movements a lot more. So Damien Harper and Tom DeSantis have done a great job in terms of really understanding what those KPIs are around deceleration, and highlighting the importance of deceleration. I think is definitely topical at the moment. So a lot of the work that we're doing is actually taking those concepts, but really trying to understand, apply a lot of the principles that Speedworks have put together in terms of projection, switch, and reactivity. But how does that look for multi-directional speed? How does that look for braking? And actually presents a good framework to understand actually how they transfer. But no, probably good time to jump in on the presentation actually. So I'll just share this.
I'll just say on this, Hailu, while you're putting that on, is that anyone that's just listening on Spotify, iTunes, Hailu is showing some graphics now as well. So make sure you go over and check out the YouTube video as well, because there's going to be some good stuff on here.
Perfect. Yeah. So again, these breaking KPIs that we're probably, again, Damien Harper and Tom DeSantis have done a really good job of capturing that. just building on top of those, we definitely view them as skills and capacities, and it probably helps me to understand those a bit more. A lot of the common things that we tend to see is the penultimate step, the ability to drop center of mass, are the big KPIs that we definitely tend to see. The ability to increase the distance between center of mass and base of support when having to change direction or brake. Those are definitely the big rocks that are definitely spoken about. But building on that, I think these skills and capacities, that how we tend to view them, helps us to kind of understand where someone needs to spend their time a bit more. And what I mean by that is, so from a braking perspective, some of the key skills are, like we spoke about, is dropping. Are you able to rapidly drop your center of mass at the point of that penultimate step, and in the opposite direction as well, especially if you're moving, if your momentum is going forwards, are you able to drop center of mass and also shift center of mass in the opposite direction in order to brake and change direction and halt momentum or forward momentum? Do you have the trunk discipline? And I'll come into this later, but do you sit or fold? Do you sit into the hole? When you drop your center of mass, do you sit, or do you drop center of mass by flexing at the trunk and being really forwardly folded? Sorry, apologies, that was a mouthful. Do you have the discipline to be able to actually create that drop of center of mass by flexing at the hip as opposed to flexing at the trunk, flexing at the thoracic spine, the lumbar spine? Are you able to, the skills that are involved to support braking again, are you able to increase the distance between your center of mass and base of support? Do you have an understanding how to be really strong in that lateral hip to create a bit of a block to the direction you're trying to avoid going in? Okay, to create a block into the ground and really create a large distance between your center of mass and your base of support, your planting foot. And then other skills are, do you have the ability to manage your speed? Okay, like, do you have to spread out your deceleration over many steps, or are you able to create a big spike in your impulse and drop your speed or your velocity decrement quite rapidly? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
For me, those are a lot of the skills that encapsulate braking. And then actually a lot of the capacities that reinforce that, actually, and this, when I say capacities, I'm referring actually to the tissues involved. So again, that isometric force, that eccentric force that you're able to produce, what is the magnitude of that force you can produce? And that could be task specific or non-task specific, but are you able to create high amounts of eccentric and isometric peak force? Can you create that in a short period of time? Do you have the active range of motion around the hips and knees in order to drop center of mass? So those are capacity that are going to support the skills that we need to be able to brake effectively. And then also, do you have that ankle stiffness and that probably ankle and hip stiffness probably, to be able to create a real block in that base of support when you do step outside of your hip? Can you be nice and rigid in that ankle to not allow any collapse? Can you be really strong in the outside of that hip to resist any further motion in the direction you're trying to avoid going in to further? And probably just to bring that all together, I think the video that we probably put together here probably really shows that really well. And actually, so this is a lateral shuffle, and something that we've used quite a lot actually as a great screening tool to understand these different KPIs in terms of their skills and capacities that an individual might have, but then also a screening tool to understand where people may be at risk of further injury, or future injury or previous injury, and just understand how they move a bit better, as well as understanding the big rocks of the KPIs in terms of the penultimate step and drop in center of mass and high eccentric force. How does that actually look when we bring it together? So here's a video, and what you'll see is good at the top and bad at the bottom, as you can see, and simply a lateral shuffle working between these two cones. Okay, but what we can start to see is actually let's start that again. Apologies. can get that started again. Yeah, bear with me. I'll freeze it at each point. We'll start that again. Okay, so good versus bad. Good on the top. Okay, so first things, some of the things that we've just spoken about. Do you have the trunk discipline actually to redirect your force? Okay, so as you can see, the person at the top is already moving into the new direction. Okay, whereas actually the trunk discipline of the person below actually shows an inability to really manage that lateral momentum that's going in that direction that he's just come from, and he doesn't really have that much discipline to really prepare for the next step. Okay, so actually what we can see here is actually tends to lean into that outside step a bit more, and as a result of probably an inability to create the right amount of force in that penultimate step, you tend to see what we see in here is actually a lot more knee abduction. And this is something that we would term as overspill, the inability to create enough braking force in that penultimate step causes an overspill of momentum, an overspill of motion. And that knee abduction is definitely a clear indicator for that inability to do that. And actually as a result of it, what you tend to see here from the person at the bottom is that because of that overspill in that penultimate step, the outside leg actually has to yield a lot more, has to brake a lot more, has to brake a lot more to move into before having to redirect in a new direction. Whereas actually the person above has been able to drop his center of mass quite well, shift his center of mass in the right direction and project in the opposite direction he's moving into, which has actually meant that the outside step can focus on pushing into the new direction as opposed to braking and pushing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Any questions there?
No.
Okay, so if we move into the next. Okay, here we go. So we've spoken about shin and trunk orientation. We'll just touch up on it again. The outside step, the center of pressure in the outside step. If we, I'm gonna struggle to go back here. Yeah. So again, that inability to be strong in the trunk shows actually that individual ends up displacing his hip a lot further into the direction he's not trying to go. Okay, and actually that being disciplined in the trunk definitely supports displacing the hip less in order to move into a new direction and spend less time in the hold, so to speak. So can you get in and out of the hold quicker? Can you brake quick enough in order to move into the new direction? And then I think that might be the main points. So that's some of the stuff that we're doing. So in order to understand braking a bit more, those are the key things that we tend to focus on: is dropping the center of mass, creating that high eccentric force in order to drop the center of mass. But then also, do you have the stiffness in the outside of the hip to be able to be strong and resist that hip displacement increasing at the point of change of direction? And also, how are you then preparing for the new direction, whether that's through the dropping of the center of mass or the trunk discipline to prepare for the new step? Is that clear so far?
It is, yeah. One thing I was going to say, Hailu, is that when you speak to players about these areas that they're going to highlight that they know they need to work on a lot of the time, aren't they? How much or how accurate is it what they're telling you, which comes across from when you actually start watching them move, if that makes sense?
So in terms of what they feedback after some reps, is that what you mean?
Even before the reps. So are they able to feed back to you, right? I need to work on this because I do this. And then it tends to fall relatively in line with what you're seeing, or is it quite far away from what you actually see when you start recording?
Yeah, I think a lot of players do have some awareness of it, especially the older players. I would say so more. The younger ones not so much. I think they have an awareness of, because there is a direct bit of feedback as well, isn't it? Their inability to decelerate usually results in some sort of performance implication, whether that's the person going past them or their ability to not stay close to a player. So they do get some initial feedback in this sense, but the older players are definitely able to articulate how the movement feels to them. And a lot of them tend to describe, I feel slow. I feel like I can't get off the ground. I feel like I can't shift my weight back again. And straight away, even in some of those conversations, you can start to understand actually, maybe actually he he doesn't have the trunk discipline, if he actually feels like he's in the hole really, really deep, or feels really slow, maybe actually is the eccentric and the isometric qualities at the hip and the knee that are going to be something that we need to pay attention to. Or actually some players might feel like they can't react quick enough, or they can't slow down quick enough, and I feel like I have to take so much more steps, which actually starts to give you a bit of an idea actually of what sort of profile they might be within this. So much like Jonas shared previously, there are these profile types, right? There are strategies, projection, switch, and reaction. Some players tend to sit on the projection and better on the projecting side. Some people need to improve their switching, and some people need to improve their reactivity. And a lot of the work that we're trying to do now is actually really trying to understand different types of decelerators. And definitely from some of the examples I'm about to show next, this is probably one good example of a specific type of decelerator, would be this player here. So if we start to see, he's going into a 10-5. Okay, and that's kind of been one of the ways we've been kind of understanding change direction and also deceleration. But he's doing his 10-5 here. And when he gets to this end point, what we tend to see along this run, and definitely at this end point, is this person here wants to spend a lot of time on the ground.
Yeah.
A lot of time on the ground in deep ranges of motion. It's really, really yields at the ankle, at the knee, at the hip, doesn't really have enough trunk discipline. And the whole movement looks very slow in order to reorientate. It almost looks like two separate movements, going in and then really having to slow before going again. Okay. And these guys, from the experience that we've seen so far, is that these guys, in terms of their types, these guys tend to be a bit more of the force dominant athletes. They're actually the guys that like feeling the ground a bit more. Same way they would do in acceleration, that they use the ground a bit more, they push for longer, is very much the similar strategies to which that they decelerate with as well. So you see that actually they want to yield a bit more. They want to spend more time on the ground because they have to overcome this eccentric force, this forward momentum, and they need more time to be able to do that in order to allow the muscles to kind of take over and do its thing, especially if they are pushers or force dominant. Whereas actually there might be some other players that actually are a bit more elastic, in a sense that actually can be really reactive to the floor, but maybe need a lot more steps to displace their deceleration across a run. Whereas this individual in front of us, actually more force dominant individual, is able to really do it in less steps, but just takes so much longer to do it. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
So yeah, so one thing that this person has been working on actually is getting him to understand how to create that force in shallower ranges and how to prepare better for the ground. And actually in this clip here, you can see actually I've got a question here. Do you sit or fold? Do you sit into the hole or do you fold into the hole? As you can see from the last clip, this individual folds and yields a lot at the joints, whether that's trunk, hip, or knee. Okay. And actually helping this individual from a skill perspective understand how to sit is one way of approaching it. But then also we might couple this with actually improving his eccentric rate of force development. So he can produce a lot of force, but actually can we help you produce that force in less time, so that you don't have to yield as much? Or can you produce that force in shallower ranges so you don't have to spend so much time in the hole? And look, we're diving into the details of this, but we always need to go back to the game a little bit. And it's important for us to understand that there's going to be very different variations of how people decelerate. Someone can have the same 10-5 time, but do it in a very different way. So we need to appreciate the variation. And that's something that we're pushing towards understanding a bit more at Speedworks. We're kind of really focusing on actually capturing the information around the 10-5, using view motion like we just showed in the last clip to really understand what the ranges or the variations between individuals and what are the similarities and what are the key KPIs. But fundamentally, it always comes back to, what does the game demand? We need to appreciate where people's strategies lie. Are you more force dominant? Do you tend to sit into the hole a bit more, or do you tend to displace your steps over many more steps or a larger distance? We need to appreciate those variations, but then also the game is also going to demand something of these players. So a key indicator for this individual is actually, he actually isn't probably not going to have the time available the time available in the game to be able to get into these deep ranges. So even though he might have a good 10-5 time, maybe a lot of our attention needs to be focused on actually improving his strategy within that in order to make him more effective for the game. So can you actually decelerate in improve your eccentric rate of force development, teach you how to sit instead of folding, which will help you prepare for the next step better and allow you to be quicker in the game, okay, in order to be able to change direction, in order to decelerate and move on to the move closer to the player or to close the space, whatever that might be. Is that making sense so far?
Yeah, it does. The other thing I was going to mention is how much does his position impact the work that's going to go on from? So obviously looking at the differences, anyone that's looking at the visual now, you'll see the big difference in his position.
Yeah.
And looking at that from a positional sense, how much does that impact your approach?
100%. I think so. There's a great study here, and so this is a study that actually Tom DeSantos did, and actually I'm looking at understanding the intensity of turns and the type of turns that occur across different positions, and the position definitely influences things a lot. So what you see here, just in order to wrap up things a bit more in a bite-sized sense, the fullbacks and centre backs have a larger proportion of high degree turns. Okay, and what does that tell us? Our understanding of these types of turns is that there is a greater deceleration element to it. Okay, obviously these guys tend to do these turns because of their positional requirements, but we need to understand the physical loads of those, or the physical implications of those positional demands. So, yes, definitely the positional demands affect things. And actually, the defenders tend to be the ones that actually need to improve on these qualities a lot more. Okay. And actually, a lot of the time, they're having to react to what the attacker is doing. So there is also a time element that we need to consider. It's not also just being good at deceleration, but actually how quick can you decelerate? Because the time you have to decelerate and is not dictated by you, it's dictated by the attacker. So that's a very key thing that we need to always understand, that okay, yes, we have these two different strategies as to how we decelerate, but fundamentally you all need to do it quickly and you don't have the time and space available. So actually my interventions may differ, but we're all trying to move these guys closer towards decelerating quicker. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And the I think the variations start to also come within positional demands. And that's where transitional movement fits in a little bit for me. It's not just decelerating as a quality. I think sometimes we view things as just a quality. And if we always start from a game speed perspective, we understand that actually the centre backs are probably going to be doing a lot more lateral shuffling where the game is in front of them. Okay. And actually breaking in that sense, maybe not actually from a sprint, because of the spaces that they're operating are a lot smaller. They may be breaking from more of a within shorter distances, and having to lateral shuffle or rotate a bit more to stay close to their defenders because their objective is to close space. Whereas those individuals that are higher up the pitch, maybe actually where there's more space available, potentially in the middle of the field, and the game is around them. Okay, there's going to be greater demand for them to turn and re-accelerate. Okay, come in from a sprint, and those are factors that we have to consider. Like, what are the entry speeds that people are coming to? How does that impact their ability to decelerate, or the demand to decelerate? Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, I think so. That's a lot of the stuff that we're kind of working on at the moment, and I think it's probably a good time to maybe come into transitional movements and I guess again, I've got a short clip here just to kind of really visualize some of the things that I've spoken about. And so we spoke about what the coaches tend to talk about in terms of player doesn't move his feet very well. And there's a short compilation here of a lot of players that definitely could improve on this quality. And it's very common in the game. So in these clips, the focus is actually all on the defenders, not actually what the attackers are doing. What are the defenders doing? And the reason why I pick out the defenders is because these guys are the ones that tend to, there seems to be a larger influence on performance in these situations. It happens from a midfielder and you don't turn very well, if you don't transition your feet very well, it doesn't really impact the game as much. So we probably don't highlight those situations enough. Whereas because we are so close to the goal as defenders or for the defenders, it usually results in a shot or a goal or a game influencing situation.
Yeah, the key critical moments, aren't they? That's what you're looking
Exactly.
at.
Exactly. Yeah. And one thing I like about these clips is that we can't really bucket these into change direction, deceleration, and sprinting.
Yeah.
It's not so clear. There's actually a mixture of all of them, and a lot of these situations, players aren't making full changes of direction. It's not a 180 turn. It's not a 90-degree turn that we might train in a training setting. A lot of these actually are very subtle changes of the direction they're moving in. And actually, some of the needs, some of the purposes and the needs for transitional movements is, yes, to set us up to enter key positions in order to set us up to hit key positions for maximal speed in less time. So actually, the ability to cross over my feet or the ability to backpedal quicker allows me to set me up to get into my max speed quicker. And if I can't do that, the game doesn't allow the time for me to be able to get into my max speed sometimes, or to be able to accelerate hard. And actually, some of the other needs are, it's not a full change. A lot of those situations that we just saw are players rotating but still moving in the same direction.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the transitional movements are about minimizing speed loss when it's subtle changes of direction or more of a reorientation that we're starting to see. So actually, how well do you minimize speed loss when you have to go from front to back? And again, and like we've already mentioned, the third purpose is actually to be able to reorientate or redirect our speed. So that's where the transitional movements come in for us. And in my experience, braking is a big part of a lot of these, especially for some of those defensive actions. Braking in a less traditional sense, as of course in a traditional sense as well. But when it comes to transitional movements, I think there becomes even more of an emphasis on skills. Actually, your ability to control your center of mass, your ability, can your hip and your trunk rotate at the same time in order to allow you to fluidly rotate your body, or open your shoulder in order to reorientate your speed or reposition? Do you have the pelvic and on top of that, do you have the pelvic and segmental dissociation that is important, or even the synchronization between hip, shoulder, and foot in order to reorientate your speed? What is your spatial awareness like? And we always tend to see defenders. I remember coaches would explain it. He's very heavy-footed when he's backpedaling. He looks like he's losing his balance. Or when he comes out of a turn, he looks really out of balance when he comes out of a turn. And these are very broad terms, but a lot of these things that they're talking about is actually a player's spatial awareness. When he does rotate when moving backwards, does he have an awareness of where he is in space? Which isn't a physical quality as such. It's actually more of a skill, in my eyes, anyway. But yes, the capacities do support that. But those subtle changes of the direction, those reorientations, those transition movements like the shuffle, the back pedal, the drop step, the crossover, are a lot more about skills. And they're equally important, very important. So I think I've waffled on for a while there. Does that
No,
make sense so far?
absolutely class information. The one thing I was going to say on that, Hailu, as well, is that you see this, don't you, when you've got a lot of older. We're talking about defenders now in this position, but when you see some of these older players,
Yeah,
maybe haven't even been the quickest right the way through the career, but definitely aren't at the ages they're playing now,
yeah,
but are able to complete these tasks
yeah,
efficiently and not get caught in some of the positions that we've just seen there.
yeah.
That sort of shows that importance of the skill, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And but to be fair, you also have to give them credit because they probably begin to develop some of the tactical understanding as well, and
Yeah,
those can influence it. Because they might not be the best physical specimens, but actually tactically they're able to position themselves really well. But I think where the Premier League is going in terms of players getting faster and the game getting quicker, for me, it only highlights the need for these transitional movements and being better at breaking even more.
yeah, definitely.
Even more. It's going to be even more important because those situations happen so much. I watch games weekly and see these situations where players could transition or control their center of mass more, or transition between acceleration and change direction better. In order to get tight to someone, in order to close a space, in order to beat the man to the ball.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes when we start from testing, we really miss these pockets of information that's really important for helping our players improve performance.
Yeah.
And it's not taken away from the things we do in the gym and the things we do on the field, because we're doing really well, I think, in that industry, in that sector now. I think we're really pushing things as well. But from a game speed perspective, how do we help people connect? How would we help players connect all these different separate skills or these qualities, so to speak, specific to the game? Because that's also what we're all trying to influence, right?
Well, it's big picture, isn't it? Because you've mentioned areas that straight away you could be implementing within a gym program when you've been speaking about movements of whichever players you're talking about there. So it all comes together, doesn't it? We've got to look
Yeah.
at the picture as a whole.
Yeah, 100%. And I've also been down the route of just going down the gym side of things, like really trying to improve this player's physical qualities. But yet you go back to the field and they have the same issues.
Yeah, yeah,
They go back to the field and they still don't know how to. With the, if anything, it becomes more challenging because they have this added strength, this added power, and they just don't know how to manage it. They don't know how to manipulate this, especially at fast speeds
yeah,
when players are running at them. And those are quite crucial parts of the game, especially from a football perspective, anyway. But even for me, we've also looked at how this influences basketball. Like some of the things how does that look in basketball? How does that look in rugby? And you see a lot of similarities. Either their ability to break or their ability to transition between movements is the thing that's actually limiting them. It isn't their ability to go in a straight line over 10 meters. It is actually their ability to run one way, break in time, or actually, break in time and move into the new direction.
yeah.
It is the ability to, we're moving backwards, but how do I now reorientate to move forwards without losing speed?
Mm-hmm.
How do I maintain speed? And those qualities. And so these are things that we're really trying to push for View Motion, and View Motion is really doing a great job for us to kind of really understand the kinetics that support a lot of the work that Damien Harper and Tom DeSantos have done. It helps us to understand what are the differences between deceleration types, because there are many different physical types. So then our intervention should follow that as well.
Yeah.
We need to first have an understanding for what type of decelerators are there out there. And soon we'll be able to push this information out. And a lot of the workshops that we've been delivering at Speedworks has been really helping. The game speed ones have really been focused around understanding transitional movements more and how to develop transitional movements. But then also some of the other workshops have been heavily focused around understanding breaking a bit more. What are some of the key drills, key skills that we need to learn to help people break better, and how do we transition that gym strength into pitch strength?
The information you've given today has been absolutely quality, and I didn't expect anything less from following on from the episode with Jonas, but I really, really appreciate you going into the detail that you have on those topics, because I think they've been really beneficial for everyone listening. I want to be really respectful of your time as well. We normally do the quick fire. We're not going to do it because what I want to do is I want to just open up the opportunity for anyone listening, if they want more information about the work that you're doing, that Speedworks is doing, any events or anything that you've got coming up, can you give any details of those now?
Yeah. So I have my own social media page. So in addition to Speedworks is definitely the hub for a lot of the information that we're going to be pushing out. A lot of the things that we're doing with players and the educational stuff. So if it isn't Speedworks website, through the coaching websites, through the Instagram pages, then you can also find my direct page that is at Hailu Theodros. Very simple. Twitter is also a space I need to get better on, but that will be a space that there'll be some information being pushed out there as well, but mainly Instagram. And then again, in terms of courses, we've got a big year of coach development days, a lot of workshops coming up where we're going to really be diving into this even more and really specifying it to specific sports. So games be for football, games be for rugby. Those are things that are going to be coming out soon. So really starting to tailor this information to people's context, right? People's day to day. I think the added bonus is a lot of the guys within Speedworks have been in a club setting, so we understand where the challenges are, and how do we take this information and apply it to a day-to-day perspective. So there's going to be a lot of that information out there.
Brilliant. Well, I urge people to go and at least go and give you guys a follow, and yourself as well, but also get invested into some of the content that you guys are putting out there, because I know everyone that's done the courses and even had days with yourselves have come away with so much quality information. I know we've sort of scratched the surface a little bit in this one, and it's hard to do on a podcast. So I think you've done a great job. So thank you very much for coming on, Hailu.
No, pleasure. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it, and hopefully come on again soon once we have a bit more to share.
Definitely. Thanks, mate.
Top man. Take care. Bye-bye.